Hi, here's a short and timely message. We currently find ourselves on the Jewish calendar during the time period called the 3 weeks, where we mourn the destruction of both temples in Jerusalem. Interestingly enough, this has been a tragic period of time for our people throughout our history. It wasn't just the destruction of both temples, it was also the expulsion of the Jews from Spain in 1492, and even more recently, the outbreak of World War I, which broke out on Tisha B'Av, the 9th of the month of Av, which was about a week and a half from today. World War I led to World War II, so this has been a tragic period of time for our people. And our tradition teaches us that it's incumbent upon each individual to mourn, to grieve the destruction of the temple, something that's somewhat challenging, because we don't know what life is like with the temple, to know the void. I'd like to share with you a small, very interesting story that transpired in Israel, which I think sheds light on this topic. There was a woman who passed away. She was a Holocaust survivor, and she left behind a substantial inheritance to her children and her grandchildren. The family was surprised when she left an additional $10,000 to her granddaughter Chana. They were wondering about the disparity in divvying up the inheritance until they found a letter that their grandmother had penned. In the letter, she describes how she sat all her grandchildren down and she shared with them the horrific, tragic episodes that she witnessed, that she was a part of during the years in the Holocaust. She felt it was incumbent upon her to share it with the grandchildren so they would be able to share it with future generations. She describes how she looked around at each of her grandchildren who sat there aghast, horrified to hear about the terrible tragedies that their own grandmother had endured. Yet she writes that from all her grandchildren, and she had many, only one of them was moved to tears, her granddaughter Chana. And she continues to describe in the letter that she realized that it was so painful for her own granddaughter to realize what her own grandmother had gone through, someone that she loved so much, that it touched her emotionally, and she cried copious tears when she thought about the horrors that her grandmother was subjected to. As we reflect upon the period of destruction of the temple and we mourn, it's really incumbent upon us to be moved emotionally, perhaps even to tears when we realize what it's like to not have a temple in Jerusalem. Our grandfather, who's a survivor, or perhaps we could say our Father in heaven, is watching us to see if we're impacted by his pain. The fact that there is no temple, that there is no place for his divine presence in this world. And if we're moved, and if we're emotional about it, and we can realize the void and the loss, well, clearly, that means a lot to him, as it did to this Holocaust surviving grandmother. Let us hope that this year is the last year where we mourn and grieve the destruction of the temple, and that God willing, by next year the temple will be rebuilt, the Jews will go back to Israel, and that void will be filled. Until next week, Shabbat Shalom.